I got a cute new kit in the mail last week, and as I sat down to try it out, I was amazed by how versatile the two stencil patterns turned out to be. You can really use them for any occasion all year long. Let me show you. This is the new Stencils 360 Friends Edition from Penguin Palace Stamps, the little sister to the original Stencils 360, and honestly, I've fallen in love all over again. This one comes with a cute little carrying case that can hold not only the tool and the two stencils that comes with it, but also any of your own inks and blending brushes, so you can take it with you when you're crafting with friends. To me, the best part about this tool is not only is it more portable than the original, it's really made to create designs that are more sized for card making. This one uses only 4 and 6-inch stencils. The original can use both these sizes plus 8-inch round stencils. If this is all new to you, don't worry. I'll go over it a little bit here, and I also have an introductory video that I made when the original tool first came out a few years ago, so you can get a sense of how it works and also the difference in sizes. To use the tool, I like to tape it down onto an old self-healing mat, and I use the grid on the mat and the lines on the base to center it. Then I put tape at the top to hold it down. This tool looks just like her big sister. She's got all the same markings on to help you turn your round stencils to the correct spot to create beautiful circular patterns. I've added a little piece of tape to translate from the degrees to the number of images in the pattern each one gives. So if I want 12, like a clock, I know I need to follow the 30-degree markings, which are the circles. There are hearts for 16, and squares for 24, and triangles for 8 turns. The tape at the top works as a hinge, and that allows me to easily get a piece of 5.5-inch square white cardstock underneath to work on, or bigger or smaller, but we'll talk about that in a second. There are markings on the base that help me line up the cardstock so it's centered, but I'll likely cut it down later anyway, so having it perfectly centered isn't that important right now. So the base has a 6-inch opening for the 6-inch stencils, and you also get this ring that allows you to use the 4-inch round stencils. I created a little tape handle to make it super easy to pull the guide ring out when I'm finished. And here's one of the 6-inch stencils that comes with the kit. You can see I also have a tape handle on that. Sometimes it's just not that easy getting your fingers in between the base and the stencil to pick it up. Before I start blending, I like to put a little temporary adhesive on my mat to hold my cardstock in place. I do have some thoughts on how to use a sticky mat with this tool, but they came to me after making the video, so they'll have to come in another video. Okay, so let's get to stenciling. I've got my paper in place and my stencils in the hole with a little star cut out right at the top at the 12 o'clock position. So now I'm going to start blending my ink through the stencil while I hold it in place. You could tape the stencil to the base, but that can get tedious since the whole point is that we'll be moving the stencil. I'm using 2 colors of ink, pink in the center and blue on the outside, and letting them blend in the center. Next, I picked up the stencil and I moved it so that the little star cutout is pointing at the next solid circle on the base. Then I blend the ink through it again. This is going to give me 6 of these pink and blue images, but only 3 turns since I'm doing 2 of them at a time. I decided that I didn't think that looked full enough, so I went back in and I filled in at each solid square, so I had 12 in total. It looks fun, right? But there's room in between each one of those for another one. So I cleaned off the stencil, and this time I lined up the little star cutout at the empty square on the base. And I worked my way around this time going to each empty square, and this time I'm using blue in the center and pink around the edges. Now, one of the things is that sometimes the stencil can slide around a little bit, either above or beneath the base. So it's a good idea just to use your own eyes and your good brain to be sure it's in the right place before you start blending. And if not, just pick it up and replace it where it needs to be. So not only can you use more than one color at a time and skip every other one so that you can go back and do something different on every other one, you can also choose not to fill in the whole pattern. That can give you a completely different look. And for this one, I'm going to leave this one turn out, so I can put my sentiment right through the center without having to overlap anything. I grabbed this sentiment set from Ink Blot Shop. It has a solid classic looking font that I love, and I inked it up with blackjack ink, which is a deep gray. Felt like black would be too harsh against those soft blues and pinks. To finish my card, I added some definition with a dark gray matte and some sparkle with my standard shimmer spray, some silver watercolor splatter, and some gems in pink and white. Now let me show you the other stencil that you get with this kit. And if you have the original 360, these stencils are also sold separately. They're called glowing beams. I'm using the same blue as last time, and I'm turning the stencil 30 degrees or to each solid circle. This gives me 6 arms in 3 turns, but because the design is a little wider, I'm getting a fuller look than I did with card number 1. And that's really one of the amazing things about these round stencils. The same stencil can give you a completely different look just depending on how many times you turn it. I cleaned the stencil and now I'm using the outline circle on the base to create 6 green arms for my design. There is a little overlap, but that's okay, it just adds to the fun. I chose this 30-degree turning exactly because I knew it would give me some blue, some green, and a bit of overlap. I trimmed this down with a circle die, and I chose another solid sentiment stamp. This one says yay, which I think works really well with the energy created by the rays in this stencil pattern. I'm stamping with navy ink this time. I think this is a good addition to my color combination. I wanted to say that using colors like navy or dark gray or even dark brown are all good choices to get that high visibility without the harsh look of black. And for me, it just makes a nice change. Now, rather than just putting this on a white background, I thought I could use the stencil without the tool to add some more interest. Now remember, if I used the tool, the rays wouldn't extend any further beyond the circle I've die cut. So I just used the round stencil like any stencil, and I blended some ink into the 4 corners of my square panel. I did blue first, and then I went back in with some of the green. See how that adds even more energy to the card? This is a great one for a graduation or some other accomplishment or celebration of good news, and I just added a narrow navy matte to bring in the color of the sentiment. I added some gems for sparkle, including a big one in the center of the A. Next, let's try combining the 2 stencils. I know that these 2 stencils were included in the kit precisely because of their versatility and also because they're very forgiving. Even if you don't get your turn degrees exactly correct, you're still going to get a great look, especially with this one. So this time I'm turning the stencil not to any particular shape on the base, just to where I think it looks good. Not perfectly 90 degrees, just slightly off kilter. Then I did the same with the green, but only one this time. Then I grabbed the other stencil, the one with the dots, and I put a couple of those in the mix as well. Isn't that fun? The addition of the pink plus the mix of placement gives us a really playful feel, and it almost feels like a snowflake to me, so I figured I'd make it into a Christmas card. I even masked off one of the biggest dots and used it to create a center. I trimmed down the panel so that the snowflake was kind of closer to the top of the panel, and I stamped my Happy Holiday sentiment underneath in gray. Then I grabbed this kind of wonky flower center stamp from a set from Technique Junkies, and I stamped that in the center as well with more pink ink. That mid-century feel of that little stamp works well with this design. To emphasize the Christmas feel, again I used my shimmer spray, silver splatter, and I created a pink mat that's also been spritzed and splattered. I finished it with a few pink gems. Okay, ready to step it up a bit? How about stenciling off the edge? Because my tool is lined up on the grid on my mat, I can line up my A2 size panel of white cardstock along that center line and know that my stencil pattern will be centered there. So this time I turned the stencil to each solid circle, and obviously I'm not going to add ink to where the stencil is over the top of the mat, just where there's cardstock. Pretty cool, right? And so easy. So I could leave it like this, but I want to do the other side. Same thing, I inked it up and turned it, only blending ink where there was cardstock underneath. For this sentiment, I decided to turn my panel so that there was more white space, and I used the Thinking of You from the same ink blot set. And it was at this point that I realized this design works for pretty much any occasion. I'm not sure the energetic and happy feeling of this would work for a pure sympathy card, although maybe tone on tone it would. Or you could make it into a flower. But definitely a Thinking of You or Get Well card like this will really cheer someone up. I added a couple more of those wonky star stamps in the green ink this time, and then a couple of gems just around the sentiment to draw your eye in. You can see how this would work as a sunrise or sunset with different colors too. Okay, now the big challenge. How forgiving is this stencil, really? This time I started with a full sheet of white cardstock, and I just shoved it under the base until I figured out where I wanted my first pattern. Again, I'm not turning it to a specific degree, and I'm just filling in what I think looks good. But I did need to make sure that I did both of my colors while I was in the same spot. It would be hard to find the center of the pattern again, although I do think it's possible. So next I moved the cardstock so that I could do another one. I didn't just want to have rows of the pattern lined up on my cardstock, so I really had to have the piece sticking way out toward me, And see, this time I left a little more white space in the pattern. Then I moved closer to the center of the piece of cardstock and I did it again. I'm happy to have some overlap within each of the patterns, but I don't really want the patterns overlapping each other. I hope that makes sense. This time I'm getting a feeling of fireworks. I absolutely love this pattern. There's so much energy in those rays, and changing up the colors is going to give so many possibilities. So I continued on with my stenciling, filling in the page. You can absolutely do this with the bigger tool if that's the one you have. I think the key is to use the tape holding the base down as a hinge and not having it taped down on any of the other sides, so you have the flexibility to move your cardstock where you need it to go. And now that I've got my whole sheet filled in, it's time for my regular spritz with shimmer spray and then splatter with watercolor before chopping it up into 4 pieces. I chose my 2 favorite panels and added that little stamp to the centers of the designs. These are feeling pretty masculine, right? Because of the colors. But do this in pinks and yellows and you're going to get some funky looking flowers. And I've already done a snowflake, so you can see what I mean by versatility. So I stamped one with a thank you sentiment and then one with a congratulations sentiment, both in navy ink for legibility. But then I added a narrow navy mat to the congratulations, along with some blue gems. And for the other one, I used a slightly wider green mat with some opalescent pearls. And even those small changes really made a big difference in the look. I love using supplies that will easily give different looks and work all year long for pretty much any occasion. Did you have a favorite? I think mine's probably the mod snowflake thing, but all of them make me smile. I'm looking forward to trying some of the other new stencils that Penguin Palace just released. I did a quick demo with some of them last weekend at the summit, and I'll put a link to that video down below, just in case you want to check it out. Right here is my 360 playlist that has everything from the initial introduction to the tool to some pretty advanced ideas for using it. I'll see you over there. Thanks so much for watching. See you next time.